antiwar.com news editor and host of Antiwar News, Dave DeCamp. Dave, great to have you back on the program. If President Trump just declares victory and walks off the field, if he says we've sunk the Navy and degraded the missile launching capability, do you think that that brings an end to this war?
Well, the problem is there's a lot of factors at play here. The U.S. is not the only belligerent. Of course, Israel seems very much committed to continuing this war. And it's unclear if Iran would even kind of accept that and if they would stop their attacks in the region. And I think it's clear that they're not going to give up their control of the Strait of Hormuz anytime soon. And we also have a war underway in Iraq with the Shiite militias who have been bombarding U.S. bases and diplomatic facilities. So at the moment, it seems like there's so much in play here. And Iran's conditions, it's tough to understand what exactly is going on behind the scenes, but one of the conditions that Iran has reportedly set is an end to Israel's assault on Lebanon, which has really ramped up. Another thing that's kind of been overshadowed by this war. More than 1,200 people have been killed in Lebanon just in the past month. And we have Netanyahu and the Israeli defense minister saying that they're expanding the occupation, that they're going to occupy all of the area of southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River. So I don't see Israel stopping that. And there's no sign that President Trump is willing to really put pressure on Israel. So it does look like it would be difficult. I think the president would have to really put some effort in if he wants to end this conflict.
The Iranians have activated a number of their proxy forces. You mentioned the Shia militias in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, also the Houthis entering the war in Yemen. What do you think their capability is to be able to constrain shipping out of the Red Sea as well?
Well, the Houthis, they certainly have that capability. And if you remember back in 2025, President Trump launched a bombing campaign against them. And essentially the goal was to get them to stop their attacks on Israel and their blockade on Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea. And that ended essentially in a stalemate with the U.S. and the Houthis agreeing not to target each other, but they continued that blockade. So this is a new era. People think of things of blockades of the past. But when you have drones and missiles that you can launch at ships, it makes it very difficult to stop those types of attacks on commercial shipping or that threat. So they could really do some damage. And they did, we saw them, over the weekend, they fired a few missiles at Israel. And it doesn't look like any real damage was done, but the capability that they have is they could put economic hurt on Israel as they did with their previous blockade in response to Israel's operations in Gaza.
President Trump posted on Truth Social today that countries like the UK should get their own oil. He seems a bit perturbed that Europe hasn't had the enthusiasm for this conflict that the United States and Israel have had. But I knowing President Trump as I do, I read like get your own oil to be the president signaling a bit of an off-ramp, that he may indeed declare his objectives accomplished. What have you been following when it comes to Europe's approach to and observations of this conflict?
Yeah, well, it seems like they really, the U.S.'s allies in Europe really want nothing to do with this war. We've seen now both Spain and Italy deny U.S. military planes access to the bases if they're involved in these attacks on Iran. But one thing, as you mentioned there, this is kind of seems to have been put out by Trump. He said, they can go get their own oil. And there's reporting from the Wall Street Journal that he has said he's willing to end the war even if the Strait of Hormuz is not fully opened. So it does look like a potential off-ramp. But the thing is with President Trump is he's all over the place. We've also seen threats. He's posting videos of major blasts inside Iran. And we saw this, if we look back at kind of the pattern of this administration, going back to both before the June 2025 war with Iran and before the U.S. attack on Venezuela and before this war. What did we see? We saw a major U.S. military buildup and kind of conflicting things coming from President Trump, coming from the White House, both in their public comments and in all of the reports. But in all three cases, those military buildups led to kinetic military action, led to attacks. And right now we are seeing a buildup for potential ground attacks on Iranian islands and ports. And I hope I am wrong, but unfortunately, I think that's the thing that we really need to kind of pay attention to. And A few thousand U.S. Marines just showed up in the region. Airborne troops are now in the Middle East. So we seem to be still moving in that direction, kind of despite what Trump is saying.
Well, the Department of War's obligation is to give the president options. Neither you nor I would be great cheerleaders of a ground war and boots on the ground in Iran, but other countries are, and this is what surprised me, Dave. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, reportedly talking to the White House about their desire to have American boots on the ground. I assumed that these other Gulf countries would want this to be over, but with the version of Iran that they think they'll get following the war, it seems that they want the United States to finish the job. That surprised me. Did it surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, initially it seemed like they were against this whole idea of starting this war, but once it started, as you said, if President Trump does just kind of declare victory and there's some sort of ceasefire, you have a hardened Iranian regime that can still project power across the Gulf and launch these missile and drone attacks. So they're essentially telling the president that, now that you started this, we want to see you finish it, and that's concerning because. On the other hand, you have Qatar and Oman. They are calling for diplomacy and peace. But kind of the major two Gulf countries there that President Trump seems to really like is Saudi Arabia and the UAE appear to be on board with more war. So you have them and also, of course, Israel pushing this. So you mentioned, Europe's not into this, but when it comes to a war in the Middle East, I think, what the U.S.'s allies are thinking and saying probably count more to President Trump. So I think that adds to the evidence that we're going to see escalation here. And I just saw President Trump, again, I mean, he's kind of all over the place, telling the press that he thinks this will be over in 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks now. And the indications are that he believes he could launch some sort of limited ground operations. And I mean, that is just the folly of every previous U.S. presidential administration that's gotten involved in wars from Vietnam to Iraq. Is they always say, oh, it's going to be over in a few weeks, a few months, and then it ends up into a years-long disaster.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.